Hello and welcome to the July 25th meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. It is now 7 o'clock. I'll start off with the normal announcement. So, pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being constructed with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raise hand feature. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. Every vote will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. I'll begin with a roll call of the board. Mr. Robbins?
Present.
Mr. Hassinger?
I'm here.
Ms. Hassinger?
Here.
Mr. Venkatraman?
Here.
Ms. McCormack?
Here.
And Mr. McGoldrick, staff. And I do see Natalia on the call as well.
Present.
All right, the first agenda item is, as always, public input. Just if anyone has anything to bring to the board's attention that's not already on the agenda, you may do so at this time. There's no one in the room. And I don't see any hands on Zoom. So moving on. Our next agenda item is an action item, determination of minor modification of plan approval for a village at Grafton Woods, 8 Pine Street.
Let me just look if the applicants are in the attendees list. Yeah. Oh.
Hello, Jean Christie. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Wonderful. So, Chris, you want to do this off, or do we want to have Jean kick us off?
Either way, I'm happy to. But Jean, you want to start it off, or?
I'll go for it. Sure.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean Christie. I'm a senior engineer with Ty & Bond. I'm here tonight to present a minor change to our plan approval for the Village at Grafton Woods project located at 8 Pine Street. I can't see who else is in the audience, but I believe I am joined this evening by representatives from GSX-ODG, which was the applicant for our original plan approval. We're also joined by our partners from Greystar. Greystar is a residential property development, construction, and management firm who is joining us as a part of our development team here. If you recall, about a year ago, we received a plan approval for the Village at Grafton Woods project. That's a mixed-use transit-oriented development where we combine multifamily housing and a commercial space at the former Grafton State Hospital property. Since that time, we've worked to abate the hazardous building materials within the buildings and have since demolished them. So now we're looking towards construction of a multifamily piece of the project. So what we're looking for tonight and wanted to discuss with the board is our minor change request. In that request, we've identified 2 pieces to our decision that we're looking to modify. They got to go hand in hand. The first is the construction duration of the project, and the second is the phasing of the project. So we're due to some market conditions where the retail and commercial developers and tenants, I guess you could say, are less inclined to, enter in any kind of contract to develop the retail piece of the project without the multifamily housing fully constructed. So I think our phasing request is that we do the multifamily housing component first completely, and then we move into the commercial component of the project as phase 2. And with that, with some of the other construction challenges of the era, we're looking to increase the construction duration from a 3-year to a 4-year term for the multifamily property. That's so from the date of the decision to temporary occupancy permit. So I'm happy to discuss either in more depth, answer some questions.
Anybody in there have questions?
I think I do, but you can go ahead first, Bob.
Hmm?
I probably will have some, but you might cover them, so go ahead first.
When I saw this, I got feeling really uncomfortable. I don't know. It seems to open up some problems that I'm not comfortable with just saying, sure, go ahead, without really looking into some of it. In my time on the board, we've had unfinished projects that turned out to be quite a problem. So I'm cautious. I'm almost, there were some sort of legal points raised in the letter I read. One claiming that the provision, I think it's claiming the provision in the permit approval doesn't comport with the state law for this project. And that's a big problem for me. No one appealed the decision, and now they're raising that something in the decision isn't valid. So I can't decide at this point whether this qualifies as a minor modification, and even if it does, I don't think that the fact that we can consider a minor modification, that there's any guarantee in the various places they're mentioned in the letter. There's no guarantee that the board will grant one, even though the letter seems to be written like all we have to do is come ask the board and get our extensions. So I'm uncomfortable, and I think it needs to be looked into.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything at this point before I jump in?
Not at this point.
Yeah. One of my concerns, from having read this proposal, is that one of the benefits that we saw when we made the decision and the approval for the entire project was the potential parking in the retail section for
Yes.
outside people as well, and that was involved in our considerations that we made with the original decision. So having that pushed out further is not that it doesn't sit that well with me.
Yeah. I didn't mention that was another point that I saw right away. I'm concerned about it. That's that's one of the implications that may or may not work out as we study this. My biggest question is, what happens if time does run out? I think it said something about the approval of the application is rescinded with maybe half a project built out there. I don't understand how that works, and I think I'd like us, since we're looking at this anyway and needing to understand what extensions and approvals and not failing to make it and so on, I think we need to explore that.
Yeah, one of my observations is that it seems apparent that the condition that claims to rescind the approval if construction is not complete within 3 years conflicts with state law. And I would assume town council perhaps should be clarified to verify this, but I would assume that state law prevails. That the condition, given that state law says that the approval is valid indefinitely, that condition as written could perhaps be interpreted to say it requires that construction be completed within 3 years, but there are no consequences if it doesn't get completed in that time. So I think it would it's clarifying things a little bit if we could basically confirm that the state law does in fact prevent condition 6 from operating as we wrote it. True, it was never appealed. I don't suppose anybody really noticed that until it came time to start thinking about the actual scheduling of the work. This is, I think, different for Chapter 40R than it is for other types of approvals that the board gives. I think this may be the only case where state law specifically says the approval is forever. For site plan reviews, for special permits, for subdivision approvals, we operate under the respective state laws, which I don't think have a clause like this in them. So it's an unusual situation for us to deal with. I will note that the phasing as proposed by the applicant is consistent with what they stated in the application. The difference here is the timing elements of it. But the original application specifically stated that the residential was going to be completed first and then the retail. So that's not different here. What's different here is the time periods. And so the applicant basically is saying that they are now anticipating a longer build-out schedule than was originally anticipated when the application was approved.
Yeah. The other piece that makes me question on the state law aspect here is just the quoted thing in the applicant's letter says remain valid and shall run with land indefinitely provided that construction has commenced within 2 years. Now, does that apply as far as construction with anything on the entire project, or does that apply per building? Because we have the retail portion has not commenced construction. Now, does that fall in the state law? Is there case law? I have no idea. It's just a question in my head.
If I had to guess, if one element of the project begins construction, that satisfies that condition. I'd be surprised to find any other way, but it might be helpful to get some clarification from someone with more legal knowledge than I do. I think I will, to the extent that I understand sort of the general economics of building retail stuff, it's come up in the past where the sequencing of a retail and a residential when they're close together, the retail folks generally don't want to commit to building anything unless they have reasonable assurance that they're going to have customers. If I were to try to build a shop of any kind, I wouldn't put money into it unless I was fairly confident I'd have customers. So in this particular case, I think this the approach the applicant is, like I said before, the applicant had always planned this approach.
Yep.
So this is not news. It's not news at all. The only news is the timing.
Dave, I think the raising of any deadline is invalid is news. 40R overrides the decision that they accepted. That's new.
That's new information that we hadn't previously been made aware of. The sequencing of construction, aside from the specific times involved, the sequencing of construction is not new.
Right. But it was going to happen relatively quickly. Now it's not going to happen as quickly.
Yeah.
Or doesn't have to.
I know we frequently concern ourselves with a project for which we've been asked to extend the time frame where the project has not yet begun.
Mm-hmm.
We've had frequent discussions on that topic over the years. Less often we get a project that gets extended periodically because it's not quite finished yet. There would be subdivisions where they're building houses one by one. And generally speaking, as long as we see progress being made, we've not had a problem with that. The case here appears that construction is very likely to commence. Arguably, the site, I'm not sure that the site clearing activity qualifies as that, but it very well could. But in any case, the applicant seems to be intent to begin construction on the cleared site soon. So that's not likely to be an issue. The completion of construction, yeah, I mean I'd like to see it done quicker, but economic conditions sort of have to prevail on that.
I'd like to see that parking lot be available.
Although right now it's not problem.
Yes. 4 years is a lot. And I think we need to get input on the what we're talking about here, and maybe some terms other than or in addition to what's being proposed to find a better coverage of our concerns.
Prabhu, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going back to the point that Justin raised earlier, right? My concern or my observation was when we approved this project, to what Bob just mentioned, there was always the benefit in terms of the parking lot. And I think I was fairly vocal about at it at that point, being a frequent user of the station parking, right? What is binding here with this approval or what is not binding is the bigger concern. What if the economic conditions change and after 5 years, there is not enough occupancy or whatnot? Those were not the factors based on which a decision was made. That's what bothers me, that if you get into the business decision-making process for approval, and then if we have to factor that in as part of this approval, that, okay, after 5 years, they come back and say, retail units, we are not yet ready. We probably need to come back and talk about it 5 more years later. What do we do? Do we say, no, you cannot occupy the housing units till you build this? I struggle with this at this point.
You can go ahead, Matthew.
Thanks, Matt Welter, Vice President of Development for O'Connell Development Group, one of the applicants, or half of the joint venture of GSX ODG LLC. I'd like to also introduce Chris Lagaki from Greystar, who is a development partner on this project, as well as their attorney. I think kind of addressing some of those issues, and I'll let Chris respond as well. Dave touched on this, but it's imperative from the fact that the retail component absolutely needs that critical mass. And this is one of our positions that we've had since the beginning. And we've heard from the brokerage community, the tenant community. There's a need to have that customer base or the potential for that customer base and to create that center that draws them there, and having the ability to have the retail lead. I think from a couple things leads to the long-term success of the project, in the sense that tenants, the tenants that we are able to attract once the multifamily is in place will be stronger. So they'll typically have stronger credit profile, which then lessens the tenant turnover. So having that consistency is important. But it also, I think, create some legitimacy to that tenant base, knowing that they're not going to be on an island. They'll have at least 317 units there, kind of from day one, to be able to support their growing business. So it absolutely is necessary that we do have some sort of critical mass. And I think one of the things that has changed our outlook, and it's been impossible to ignore, is that when we did apply and present this, we were kind of still in the midst of the beginning of the COVID kind of overall, full impact, and it hadn't really rippled through to understand what that means to developers, to retailers, to customer preferences and actions. So, we've seen and been tracking the parking lot and the commuter lot, where I believe it's roughly about 400 units or 400 parking stalls at North Grafton. We still haven't seen that demand pick up to pre-COVID levels, and it's still unclear if that demand will reach kind of the peak that it was before. So, some of the pressure that was leading up to the parking, I think, has been lessened, and I don't know if it's going to return in terms of the movement to work from home, from flexibility in in-person meetings. So there's been a lot of movement in the marketplace in general that has kind of shifted consumer preferences and the overall commercial real estate landscape. So we're trying to respond in real time and to the market to be able to ensure the success of the project. And Chris, feel free to
Thank you, Matt. If I may, Chris Legutsky here. So as Matt had mentioned, I work with Greystar on the development team. We are a construction and development company, and this is really our wheelhouse. We operate as a construction manager or general contractor on this type of project, and we've been working with the applicant here, Matt, and his team to try to work through bringing this project into the next phase and getting it moving forward and built here. So one thing I want to just call out is just the impetus for the timing adjustment here is really just responding to the practical I think constraints of where we are in the timing, right? The original application approval require that the entire project be constructed by a date certain, right? And so, we can certainly, take all feedback here and make sure that everything is wordsmithed in the right way. But just from a practical standpoint, that outside date, we've put together a detailed construction schedule, and we just don't think that this building can be constructed by that time, right? So one, we think it's somewhat of just a sort of a critical element, right, of just getting that date adjusted for the fact that this is now about a year since that application was approved, and therefore, right, for us to go from the current state of the site, which has been very actively in progress here with demolition completed, and us being ready to move this vertical, that's the driving factor, right, for why we need that timing. The intent is not to modify the way that this project would be built, or to extend that construction process. Candidly, I think we could build it as fast as anyone could, and that's just how long it takes to build a building like this. That kind of a 317 unit project with that kind of a garage structure, you are in the realm of a 3-year construction period, and it's just too tight, we think, to keep the original dates. So, reiterating what everyone has said, I think Matt put it really well, and others who have spoken on just the practicality of the retail. We think that retail village, we don't want to deliver something that would be challenged or blighted if we can't occupy it. And I think that it's very common when we do mixed use developments to bring in a different phasing element, so that you can have the activation on the property, and you can have the base of whether it's residents or workers or whoever the occupants and users of that property are, to be able to substantiate or validate the the following uses, in this case, retail. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're really looking forward to getting this vision brought forward and the project mobilized here this year. Our sights are set on getting construction vertical on the apartment buildings this calendar year, and so we're hoping that we can make that happen. We've got our counsel on as well, Jennifer Schultz. I'm not sure if we can have her speak as well, but we'd be more than happy to attempt to address some of the legal points that were mentioned. So I'll defer to the board if that would be okay for our counsel to take a shot at answering some of those concerns or questions.
Yeah, let me just put in a word here that I very much want to see this project succeed. And basically, whatever it takes on our end to facilitate that, I'm all for it.
And I'll say, just from my seat, I'm aware that no one on this board is a legal expert. So yes, having Ms. Schultz, speak to things would be, in theory, useful. But we have no basis to actually measure the legitimacy from our board's perspective on that. If people on the board want to hear from her, I'm happy to allow her to speak. But I think it at worst a letter to the staff that could be shared with our council could be useful. But I don't know that we're gonna get anywhere further on our end just by hearing a repeat of the statements. But that's just me.
Well, I've expressed my concerns. We all want the project to go forward and quickly.
Yes.
Now, I don't know why it takes any different amount of time to get the building built than it did when we did the approval. It was 3 years then, it's 3 years now. So there's a gap there. But as I said, I'm not comfortable now. I need answers. I need input from our council. We can do that. I think that the applicants have heard everybody's concerns. Maybe they want to go off and see if they can work out some ways to address that in their request. But if we take a vote tonight, I can't vote yes.
Well, I guess I can chime in that I think everyone on the board wants this project. I don't think there's a person on the board that wasn't originally very enthusiastic. It's still an important project to the town, and we represent the town. I agree on some points. I do understand we've given extensions before. That part for the construction is not actually the biggest deal. That's not the biggest shortcoming. I can see very clearly on such a big project giving an extension. Really, we do that. I guess the issues that have been brought up are still something that I'm a little bit shaky on. So that's where I stand.
I do see Ms. Schultz's hand up. I just will briefly just restate that I don't know if getting to the weeds of the legal aspect is useful tonight for us, but if there's something that's new to add, by all means, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Jennifer Schultz. I am counsel for Greystar. I run the permitting group at Sullivan & Worcester Law Firm. And I think just what I wanted to clarify from our perspective, where I did not author this letter, and obviously Greystar is not the original proponent of this, but from our perspective, and when I read the request in the letter, it's seeking to utilize the local powers provided to the board to exercise their discretion to provide the extension. And although, of course, it does point out that 40R, may in fact have overridden the original condition, I do not believe that the applicant is seeking to overturn or challenge that decision, but instead is simply noting that the request for a timing change and specific phasing to be assigned to the project would comport and conform with the purpose of 40R that includes the ability of a 40R approval to run indefinitely so long as it is commenced, construction is commenced within the 2 years. And so that is simply, my legal view representing, the entity that hopes to be the developer of the project and is prepared to move forward, is that this is seeking that the board use its local power to allow for this phasing and timing, and is not a challenge. Certainly it could have been presented in that way, but I don't believe that was anyone's intention to challenge or make this sort of legally confusing, but instead simply to request that the board allow for this alteration, as Chris noted, to ensure that they can proceed in this project consistent with market conditions, and frankly consistent, simply as he noted, with the reality of how long it takes to approve things. I'm sorry, not approve things, construct. Construct the project. Greystar, I represent them on, right now, 5 or 6 different projects around the Metro West Boston area. And, in my experience representing them, that it is consistent with what Chris noted, that it simply takes 24 to 36 months for construction of a residential project of this size. And they simply want to make sure that their approvals do not lapse so that they can complete it. Thank you.
So what is it that the board needs to know in order to come to a conclusion on this? I think from my perspective, I think what I'm hearing is that in terms of the overall timing of the project, what the applicant is proposing as a revised timeline is, first of all, it's consistent with their original plan. The original plan didn't, their original application didn't spell out any timing estimates.
Yeah.
So, but the sequencing is consistent. The applicant is telling us that this is at this stage of the development of the project, this is what they believe to be a realistic timeline. And I'm not going to demand that they do a year's worth of work in 6 months or anything like that. I mean, we have to. I guess we have to be sort of convinced that what the applicant is proposing to us is a realistic timeline, assuming that they are going to pursue this with all due diligence, that they're not going to slack off halfway through. And obviously market conditions can change over time. That's not within anybody's control. The questions about the sort of the legal relationship between 40R and our decision, there's an apparent conflict there. It would be useful to sort of have a consistent reading on that. That in fact the condition, literally as we wrote it, is not enforceable as such due to the conflict of Chapter 40R. But I think overall the applicant's intent is to pursue this project and get it done as fast as they reasonably can. We might like to see it done faster, but like they say, the bearing of a child takes 9 months. No matter how many women are assigned to the job, no matter how you want to accelerate it, there are certain things that take X amount of time to do. And so within that, I think if we can be comfortable that the applicant's timeline is realistic, and we can be assured of some of the sort of the legal aspects that we've talked about, what else do we need to know?
Well, Prabhu asked the question, what happens if they run out?
Well, what can we do about that?
What strength do we have? What happens if one of these runs out? What does withdrawal of the approval do with the building with the residential units completed?
It's an interesting question, and I don't think I have a direct answer for tonight. I think my understanding of that condition oftentimes is to provide leverage to have applicants come into the board and give a status update while that is, if that deadline is nearing, to understand and to relook at with the board what a reasonable timeline to finish the work is. But in terms of actual enforcement of if that passes, I don't have an answer for that tonight. That's something I can look into in more detail.
Would this be something that, we've got a question or two for council and possibly other, would this be something that we can continue this discussion at our next meeting and hope with hopes of resolving it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. There's no, I don't think this has a time. We don't have to ask for a request for a continuation in this case, do we?
No, at this point, this is an informal process.
Mm-hmm. So someone should decide whether to take a vote tonight or decide to put it forward to the next meeting.
Anyone have a strong feeling on the board?
Yeah, I would say we've got a couple questions that ought to be. We have to be able to to answer those within the next 2 weeks. And I think once, if we, in all likelihood, we're going to end up seeing, that this makes sense, and we're going to want to, we're going to come to some conclusions about how to go about it. But I don't see us taking any action here that is going to jeopardize the project.
No.
I would be very much opposed to doing anything that seriously can jeopardize the project. As I said, and I think we all would like this project to succeed. Just a matter of resolving a couple of questions in our minds. And if we can get that done in 2 weeks, then hopefully we can nail this down and go from there.
So yeah, our next meeting would be August 8th. And I think, and let's do that.
Yeah, I think respectfully, I would just ask if the applicant is amenable to that timeline as well.
It doesn't change anything.
Yes,
Your
we're amenable.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look at it this way. If you were to start construction tomorrow, there's nothing in the existing decision that would delay that. This is really looking forward to the progress of the project some years down the road. I'd be surprised if there was any real worry. I mean, as I said before, in any case, I am not going to vote for something that would kill or seriously delay the project, or delay it at all, really.
Yeah,
We want to see it done.
I agree with that.
What do you agree with? Do you agree with
Not-
continuing it until next time?
I agree with trying not to delay the project in any way.
Well,
And yes, I think we should delay it until our next meeting at this point.
So if we have
need a motion, or you can order it, Mr. Chair.
I'm just going to order it at this point. No one's objecting.
All right, let's move on.
All right, we'll have a answer for you with all luck at our next meeting. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing shovels in the ground here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they've had a lot of shovels in the ground, a lot of steam shovels in the ground.
Yes, let's start building up instead of tearing down. But
Yeah, that's what he said, going up, right?
Yep.
Moving up.
yeah, the tearing down had to happen first.
All right, seeing how the time is 7:30, we do have some public hearings to attend to. Our first is a project plan with Tufts University. Mr. Clerk, want to read the notice when you
Let's
pull it up?
see. We have the Grafton Planning Board will hold a public meeting on July 25th, 2022, commencing at 7:30 p.m. in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, Grafton, Mass. To consider an application for project plan review for Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University pursuant to Section 9.6.1.2 of the Grafton zoning bylaw for the construction of an accessory paved pad approximately 8,500 square feet in area and electrical lines and equipment for 2 accessory MRI trailers to the Swine Research Center Swine 2 facility on property located at 9 Yorkshire Lane off Discovery Drive, shown as Grafton assesses map 21 lot 1A. Said property is located in an office/light industry OLI and campus development overlay CDO zoning district. The applicant is DBSET Incorporated and the owner is Tufts University Trustees. Copies of the application and plan are available for public inspection at the Planning Department during regular business hours or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov on the Planning Department /Development Projects webpage.
Okay.
There we go.
No, but okay.
Anything to start us off with, Chris, or should I hand over to Mr. Petit?
Yeah, so Tufts approached us for this project, kind of expanding the operations in this area of the Swine 2 facility. They're looking to, I think the project notice is pretty detailed in what's proposed, expanding some of the paving of the area, and providing 2 MRI, 2 trailers that will hold MRI equipment for their research. So definitely in line with the current use of the property. I know that Jean Petit is on the call. If there's anyone else that you'd like me to promote that's in the attendees, just let me know and I'm happy to do that as well. The applicants did come to development team meeting and discuss the project with staff, and that led us to where we are today.
This is Jean Poteet, and I'm the campus planner at the Cummings School campus. For this project, presenting for this project, we have Peter Markham, who is the CEO of CBSET, Reagan Andriola, who is a Beals and Thomas land civil engineer, and is Misty Williams might be on the call, as
Yep.
well as Greg Peterson, who's the attorney for CBSET. Yes, Misty Williams is on the call. Misty is the veterinarian for CBSET and also is a graduate of the Tufts Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. She is the main veterinarian for the company. Peter, do you want to just start and explain what your company is doing? The company is obviously interested in doing a long-term ground lease at the swine building, but part of their business plan requires that they have MRI capability there. So the long-term ground lease will not be really finalized until we get CBSET and we get the local approvals. So Peter, do you want to kind of introduce the company, and then maybe Rian can talk about the technical details of the request?
Sure. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Can people hear me okay? Perfect. So CBSET is a not-for-profit research institution. We were founded in 2006. I founded the company with Dr. Elazar Edelman, who's the director of the Institute of Medicine and Engineering Science at MIT. And we have facilities in Lexington, Mass, where we house about 100 large animals, and we do very complicated surgical procedures, helping innovators and companies develop new medical devices, new therapies, and essentially we're structured to help bring new cures to patients with various therapeutic diseases and therapeutic needs. And we partnered with Tufts. A lot of our veterinarians, we employ several veterinarians, 3 boarded pathologists, 3 clinical veterinarians in Lexington, and most of them come from the Tufts educational system. And so for years we've been buying swine from Tufts, and an opportunity came for us to take over the swine tooth facility as a long-term ground lease to purchase the building. And in order for us to use the facility in the intended way, we need to be able to do high resolution imaging on the property. And this is accomplished now with trailers. You basically can pull them up and plug them in, and so you can change out technology. But without the ability to perform imaging, then the facility wouldn't be equipped for our needs. And I think, for the campus development as a whole, CVSCT will probably become an anchor tenant for the development of the whole campus, enabling Grafton to pull more biotech industry into the area. And for us, this little project, basically paving and putting in some power so that we can hook up MRI trailers and CT trailers, is really a critical phase project, because we've closed on the deal with the contingency that the work become underway, and we have a need to have the work done before the end of the year. And so it's a small project. We're very excited to come to Grafton. We're very excited to take over the swine breeding operation. We're very excited to continue to integrate the swine operations with the student population at Tufts. And we're looking to try to turn this around quickly so that we can get moving on this project.
Great, thank you, Peter. I think I can probably jump in. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. I was having some audio issues, so I missed most of Jean's introduction, but I have a feeling it was pretty comprehensive, so as well as that public notice was. So good evening, everyone. My name is Regan Andriola. I'm a senior landscape architect and associate with Beals and Thomas. So you've met Tufts and CBSET. So we are here tonight to talk about the MRI trailer pad. So very, fairly small project. And Peter just talked about the importance of it and how it will be used. So I just want to pull up the plan and we can talk through. I can show you the details of it. But as was stated, this project plan approval was submitted in compliance with section 9.62 of the zoning bylaw. Let me pull up the plan if you don't mind me sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see this?
We can.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, great. It's a fairly small project here. We have Discovery Drive. This is actually to the west. This would be Yorkshire along here. This is the existing swine 2 facility. And just to the north of the existing facility is where we are proposing the paved pad for the MRI trailers. It's approximately 80 by 80. If you wanted to be specific about it, the longest distance here is just shy of 90 feet and about 60 feet here, 80 feet wide. We've shown 2 MRI trailers, which are approximately 48 feet in length by 8.5 feet or so wide. We've shown those conceptually on this pad. However, the idea is that they might not be placed exactly there. They might be separated a little bit more to provide the adequate space needed to load the animals in and out. And also, as these are delivered here, these trailers, they might not land in this exact space. So that's the reasoning for this pad. Really, the maneuverability and placement of these trailers is the reason for needing this space. associated with the trailer, as we've discussed, is some new electrical will be required, an upgraded electrical, so its own transformer. So the idea is that a new transformer pad and cabinet would be here just to the east of our proposed paved area. And there'd be new electrical work that would have to come, new electrical trenching from the building to the new transformer, as well as from the old transformer connecting to the new pad, as well as a new utility pole. Let's see, what else can we say? We are on the agenda tomorrow night for Conservation Commission. So we don't need to get into the details really of that, but we have filed a request for determination of applicability with the assumption that we will we'll have a negative determination because we are entirely outside of the 100-foot wetland buffer zone here. But we have provided erosion controls between the project and the wetland buffer zone. There is an existing paved parking area here that currently isn't striped. So part of our project would be just to stripe those parking spaces, including, an access aisle here. There will need to be room to transport the animals from the building to the MRI trailers. So that's part of another reason for having some, there'll be some access straight through here. And in general, the project, meets all requirements, the setback requirements of the zoning bylaw. The trailers themselves are more than 400 feet setback from the property line, and we're more than 1,000 feet from the CDO, the Campus Development Overlay boundary. So fairly small. We don't have any landscaping proposed other than to loam and seed the disturbed areas. Tufts does not want additional landscaping or trees or shrubs that could cause, could encourage more wildlife in that particular area. But in general, the pavement, actually, let me get to the next, this is actually a better, the 1,000-foot circle exhibit. This is, you can see the orange is the proposed work. The blue is all the existing impervious within this 1,000-foot radius circle. The project itself, with this increased impervious, we are still only at 7.8% impervious throughout this entire circle, which is far less than the maximum 60% ground coverage. And as far as open space, even with this, with the project, with the increased impervious, we have 92.2% open space, which is quite in excess of the 25% minimum requirement. So fairly basic. I think, if there's any other specific questions, happy to answer, but I don't want to, bore you with with the kind of obvious details here. So I think we'll just leave it up to the board. Anyone who has questions, we do understand that a peer review was requested by the town, and the peer review fee has been mailed in and the town has received it. So I believe that should be underway. So we're hoping that it's a fairly simple review.
Yeah, I'll just briefly speak to that. I'm told that our peer reviewer we usually use has been on vacation, so he has not quite completed the peer review of this project yet.
Okay. But he has begun it?
Yep. I wasn't. Yeah.
That's great to know.
I wasn't sure.
Great. Okay. Great. Okay.
Anyone have anything for the board?
No real questions or comments. I think this is one of the more straightforward, plans I've seen for this area, and subject to confirmation by the peer reviewer. I don't see any problems that I would observe or anything.
Yeah, for the applicant's knowledge, I'm sure Jean Poteet already knows this, but we typically use the same peer reviewer between us and Conservation Commission, so it's likely that with it not being back today, that it probably won't be back in time for them for tomorrow, but who knows, you could get lucky.
There was not going to be a peer review because we were just doing an RDA and not asking for confirmation of in order to expedite this, we said no peer review on that, so.
Okay.
Yeah, for an RDA, that would not generally be necessary, I would.
Makes sense.
Couple of just very quick thoughts. Is this going to be where trailers come in and they pretty much stay there, or is this trailers coming and going each time you need to look at an animal or something, somewhere there?
No, they pretty much park and for a period of rental, and those rental periods, based on which technology we need for what particular study, usually are 3 to 6 months at a time.
Okay.
And they require to be plugged in continuously, and they require a special it's 480 volt transformer with a special connector, and so the magnets need to stay cooled. They don't make a lot of noise. They have an air conditioner that runs when they're running, but they need to stay plugged in, and typically it's they're quite expensive to rent. They're $30,000 to $40,000 a month.
Hmm.
So typically it's a 3 to 6 month rental on a big program where we bring in a specialized technology to meet the imaging endpoints of that, whatever the needs are of the project.
Yeah, I read through most of the submission, and it struck me how much seems to have been going on out there. Every time we talk about that place, I hear more and more interesting stuff going on, kind of out there in the back, and very interesting. But I realized I just asked Linda, and I can't tell whether it's pigs, hogs, or swine. Can someone help me with that?
Yeah. Depends on who you're talking to, right?
Okay. I haven't missed something.
Yeah. So one of the things is, so Tufts has been breeding animals there for 20, 25, 30 years now. And that colony has provided the research animals in a very clean, research grade swine to the local hospitals and research institutions in Boston, in Western Massachusetts, UMass, and others, and we are, we're going to take over that breeding operation. We've actually started to take over it already, with the hopes of keeping that resource in Massachusetts for the longer term, because it's really important to have animals with a clean health when you're assessing technologies that are going to be used in the future for humans. So,
yeah. I hope the town folks realize that that's an interesting story about something here in Grafton. We have folks who are doing something very beneficial that most people think that's where you take your dog to get it looked at, or whatever. Or where there are students doing actually interesting stuff. Sometimes we see them on television. Okay, well, I'm happy with it.
Yeah, well,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we're also hoping to, as you probably know, there's an extraordinarily high demand for veterinarians in the United States, especially veterinarians that are boarded in certain specialties, pathology and laboratory animal medicine, and so we're hoping to be able to utilize the student population as employ them in the future, because that's one of our goals as a 501c3 as well.
Well, I guess maybe we want to continue this until next meeting, and ask that a draft decision be put together on the assumption that the peer review is not going to get in the way.
Makes sense. Is that a motion, Bob?
Yeah.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Well, actually, just as a point of order, before I bring this forward, I think we need the applicant to actually request that continuance.
Sure.
Request a continuance to your next public hearing.
Yep. Our next hearing will be August 8th at 7:30 p.m. We'll just need you to send an email to staff to, have that in writing for the continuance, but we'll be able to take the vote now.
Sure.
So we
So
have,
now my message is to grant that request that we're going to receive.
yes. So I have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call. There's no further discussion. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll see you at our
Thank,
next.
thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Couple weeks.
It's a
Very
you.
nice
Bye-bye.
to meet you
development.
all. Thank you. Looking forward to being in Grafton.
With our cameras, there's
Thank you.
cameras.
Thank you.
They're sharp.
All right. Our next agenda item is another public hearing for request of modification and site plan approval for Afonso Village, 100 Westboro Road. We do have a request to continue from the applicant.
Move the board grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to August 8th at 7:30 p.m.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll bring this up at our next meeting. And that's the end of our public hearings. So going back up the agenda to discussion items. First there is master plan. Do we have anything to discuss on that today?
So no, I left that on there. I'm
Yep.
still following up with CMRPC, but I don't have an update for tonight.
By the way, Alfonso, that is the most delaying project in the world.
I mentioned that it's going for the record.
Alright, our next discussion item is fall town meeting warrant articles and scheduling. I'll let you take that over, Chris.
Yep. So I do have. I was unable to get to the parking, even though I think Robert Berger, the building inspector, had kind of really outlined some good language. But I still have to just put that together into a version for the board to review. I did focus more from last meeting to this meeting on looking at the scheduling and how that should play out, looking at the October town meeting. Given the town meeting for October is the second week, that'll be October 10th. And so working backwards from that, we do have some deadlines in September and August. What I'd like to do is publish notices on our 4 zoning articles, which are kind of bulleted behind here. I apologize. I forgot to add the Mill Villages zoning that we've for the past 2 years been reviewing and completing, and I think is substantially done. So I'd like to add those 4 public notices to be heard at the August 22nd public hearing. That puts us actually quite ahead of schedule for the October 10th town meeting from those deadlines. But I think we're in a position to get that started. We can start by opening the public hearings, which will satisfy the deadline requirements, and if we need more time to go through all 4 of those, we can start with a few of them, the kind of more substantially complete ones, and then take up the others at the next meeting by continuing them. But that's the course of action or the scheduling that I'd like to propose to the board tonight. And if so, we can go ahead with developing those notices.
Just a nit. Isn't town meeting October 17th, the third Monday?
Third Monday.
That's what the bylaw says anyway, third Monday.
Okay, I may have picked looked at the wrong date, but yeah, then we would be even more ahead of schedule. I think I'd like to start to get the public hearings
that
going
doesn't
on this.
change our idea of getting things done ahead of schedule, ahead of time.
No. Sometimes things get delayed
Yep.
as you go along, or your hearing needs to be continued because you discover something that you need to do. But can you actually publish hearings before articles have been submitted to the warrant. Because I think that technically articles are submitted to the select board and they refer them to the planning board for a hearing. Usually that gets a little bit expedited, I guess, in town hall, but you ought to have articles when the ads reach people. Yeah, they should be able to see the language that we're talking about, which is perfectly fine. You know, that's up to you, Chris.
Okay.
But I'd say proceed as needed.
Yep,
Do
understood.
we need a motion? I don't think so.
No motion is needed, but I just wanted to make sure that timeline fits. And thank you for that comment for the warrant language. I'll make sure to have that put together as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of when, if you're advertising a public hearing, there needs to be language that the public can read.
Yep.
Preferably language that's at least close to what we ultimately will be putting on a warrant.
Yeah. Well, I think after the hearing, we can. I don't know whether we have to propose it as an amendment or whether we can fix it. But anyway, so someone there in the building where you are can sort that out.
That's a detail that deal with as needed.
So then the only other thing I just wanted to touch on. So we have the four warrant articles. I'm happy. We never did go through the presentation that I developed for the marijuana delivery regulations. I have not had a chance to update that since I first put it together back for February of 2022. I know, Dave, you've been diligent to review that and propose some additional. I don't know if you wanted to present any of that tonight. Or...
Yeah, we could. We could at least talk about it. I think I had posted these for a meeting back in March or April, and we never really got to talk about them. I've largely because Justin found the coloring I was using odd, which I would not argue at that point. I just put up on the meeting materials today basically the same text, but with some more sensible coloring. And since I just put it up there, if I had thought about it, I would have had it put up a few days ago, but I had other things on my mind. So I don't necessarily want to go through it all line by line today, but there are a couple points I wanted to raise. I wanted to just sort of start out by just sort of explaining what I tried to do here. And as we had talked a while back, and Chris, your presentation sort of was focused on the need to accommodate the various forms of marijuana delivery that had been put in place since we had previously revised our bylaw. So I spent a fair amount of time reviewing, your presentation, Chris, and reviewing the regulations and the current regulations on both the adult use and medical use side of things. That the changes, and I ended up realizing that there's actually not a whole lot that we needed to change to deal with the delivery, because to an extent delivery was already allowed in the bylaw. But there were a few wrinkles, like the different classifications of delivery operations. And then, because I was reading through all the regulations, I realized that our bylaw was written back when there were two completely separate sets of regulations from two different departments. So since that time, the DPH regulations have basically been absorbed into the CCC regulations. There are still two sets of regs, one for adult use and one for medical, but they're very, very similar now. So I went through the bylaw from front to back and updated references to the regulations to make them much more consistent. And kind of the document I wrote here kind of explains all that. But a couple points I wanted to raise with the board for, if for nothing else, just to, as something to think about and get some feedback on, then maybe we can consider this one at least. It's somewhere close to being in a form it's not written as a warrant article yet, but it's something close to something that we could then transform into a warrant article. But there's a couple of points, like I said, not to repeat myself, which I do entirely too much. There is a classification of marijuana operations called a marijuana courier. A marijuana courier would have a place of business, but they will never store, even temporarily, marijuana products in that place of business. So what I wrote up was I proposed that a marijuana courier could be permitted in the neighborhood business and community business districts by special permit. Special permit, because that's what we've done for all other marijuana business. But it occurs to me to think that because the marijuana courier is not touching, their place of business is not touching marijuana product, it's not clear that it needs to be, and where did I put my note on that? It's not clear that it needs to be a special permit. So just something to think about, that their marijuana courier is more like any other business professional general office. It's basically a place where they might keep their vehicles overnight. So it's comparable to the zoning categories of business professional general office, which in many districts are permitted by right, in some cases permitted by site plan review. So we could consider sort of aligning that more closely with the other businesses that general nature of a business operation that has trucks or delivery vehicles, but they go and pick up product one place and deliver it somewhere else, but product never enters their place of business. And so that's, just at this point, I'm going to suggest that as a possible change to what I had previously proposed. The other thing we talked about back in March or April was the expectation that on-site consumption of marijuana would become a thing. And it turns out the regulations, not longer after I wrote this stuff up, the regulations were updated to include a new kind of marijuana establishment called a social consumption establishment. And so that's something that we can consider whether we need to accommodate that now. I think from one angle, I'd say there's at least one way we could do that, and it'd really be no big deal, just add that as another category. The reason that there's maybe no rush on it is because we're probably years away from that being a reality. When that category was established, added to the regs, it goes along with a pilot program. Their plan is to engage anywhere from 6 to 12 municipalities in a social consumption pilot program where the such facilities would be licensed, as I said, in anywhere from 6 to 12 communities. That hasn't even gotten off the ground yet, as far as I can tell. There are no social consumption pilot communities listed on the CCC's website. And when that program does come into play, the licenses for social consumption are going to be limited to what they call an economic empowerment priority and social equity program licensees, which are probably, the pilot program is probably targeted towards communities that are not very much like Grafton. So it's unlikely that Grafton would be even considered. Municipalities apparently have to apply for this, and as far as I know, Grafton hasn't. So it's social consumption as a reality is farther down the road from us. But if we were to simply list social consumption establishment, to define that in our bylaw and allow it in the same zones that we allow other marijuana establishments, that sort of puts us in a position to be ready to adapt to it at such time as we really need. We may find out the pilot program may produce some changes in the regulations, it may produce some other things that result in further changes to that. But we could easily add that as yet another type of marijuana establishment the same zoning restrictions, and so that we at least, we're there, we're minimally there as best as we can tell, given what we know right now. So that's basically it as far as what I've come up with.
Yeah, I'll say the two thoughts that pop into my head on what you said is that number one, the marijuana delivery operation, marijuana courier, they could be considered as in theory, a fleet of vehicles leaving a business at peak traffic times and then returning at peak traffic times, depending on the nature of the business's operation, and how many marijuana establishments they're going to be servicing. That I don't know how likely that is, how saturated the playing field is in that market, but that could be something that may make a outright allowable use a little difficult in terms of palatability. I don't know yet. That's just a thought I just had tonight. If that is a thing we want to keep a special permit, or even reduce the zones it's allowed in for that reason. I kind of think of it along the lines of maybe a school van company kind of a thing, where they leave at a certain time and they return at a certain time. But that's the first thought.
Yeah, I thought very much the same thing, and I went looking in the use table for a use classification that would apply to a business like that, whether it's a fleet of school or any other sort of probably modest-sized fleet of vehicles. And I didn't really find anything that exactly matched that. The closest was business, professional, or general office. And that's kind of why I mentioned that particular category, because I didn't see any category that specifically addressed housing a fleet of vehicles that might arrive and leave at any particular time.
Yeah.
Now, we might want to, we could consider that as sort of a whole other thing, but I think site plan review, if I remember right, includes traffic.
Yes.
And so site plan review might be, to specifically cover the traffic thing, I would look for, the sort of same level of review that we would apply to anything else that could generate a noticeable amount of traffic. But that's sort of, that's a sort of open for further thought. I'm not trying to nail that down tonight, but just to, get us thinking about it.
The other thought that came to mind is, outside of Grafton accepting marijuana establishments in the current forms and what this bylaw would do, should social consumption become a thing a year or two down the line, our bylaws, as they would stand after this, would not even mention it. So it'd be, a little, I don't think the way it's worded we would allow it, but it might be something that we want to, again, a tonight thought, it might be something we would want to call out as saying not allowed at, until, basically until the town would approve it at some point. Not that we expect it to be a thing that's available in Grafton, even without that in the near term, but it could be something, it could be worth calling out.
Yeah, along that line of thinking, it occurred to me to wonder whether it would be legal for us to prohibit social consumption in all zones.
I think so. I don't, we can't prohibit the stores. We had to allow 2, maybe 3, because that category had a provision, but this doesn't. You went through so much, I'm sure I'm not even remembering all the different things. But first of all, when you're in new ground and trying to be ready for something that you don't know too much about, the best plan is to do special permit, because special permit, if it's not a problem, fine. But if we discover problems, we have a tool. So my first thing is think in terms of special permit, just because it's a new unknown. It's the most secure way. When you go to town meeting, what are we opening up? Well, we're doing it in the most conservative way we can. On-site consumption, I thought at some point, maybe we took it out or maybe something happened to it, but I thought we had some language back in the early days about on-site consumption, not speaking of this new category particularly, but just generally on-site consumption not being allowed. Thinking mostly, I guess, in terms of the types of operations that we do have. But I'd like to be able to put that forward under special permit in a way that the town could either say, okay, put that in the zoning for whichever districts we pick, or if they didn't want it, the action they took would leave us with it's not allowed. So I'm not sure exactly how to craft that to make that happen, but I think giving the town a chance to vote how they feel about that might not be a bad idea. I'm not entirely sure. Well, I've never seen one of these places, and I'm not likely to ever go in one. So I can't stand smoke of any kind. But I guess people have feelings about it. The delivery use and activity, I was wondering about use, whether there's a need. If I guess a category where there's storage going on does need a permit, and why not make it a special permit, because we don't know enough to be more lenient. The delivery thing, as you were saying, is that actually much different from a warehouse, a small warehouse? It's a place the trucks come and go, and we have we have at least some number of places where that kind of thing happens. I don't imagine, I've never seen one of these delivery or transport, whatever it is, transporting, to have any idea whether they'd be big enough to, I imagine a couple of trucks. I don't imagine a big operation, although we're in a location that, we're near the turnpike and then in the middle of the state. I could see some interest in that.
Yeah, there are three distinct categories of delivery operations of one form or another in the regs. One is a delivery endorsement that a marijuana retailer can get where they can do their own delivery. There's the marijuana delivery operator, which is allowed to have to warehouse product in their facility. And so I've proposed that be the usual restrictions on marijuana establishments, special permit in the two districts we allow it. And then there's the marijuana courier, which is the vehicles, but the marijuana courier's operations, their facilities, the land, the building, they are prohibited from even temporarily warehousing product.
Yeah.
So
we should probably somehow cover that base so that when that becomes a reality, the zoning officer will have a category to look at and go with.
That's what I'm proposing, and my proposed revisions is exactly that.
And then as I read through what was posted today, Dave, I was a little unclear with the medical category, medical treatment or whatever it is. It listed a whole lot of types of activity, and it wasn't entirely clear whether to meet the definition you had to have all of them or you had to have at least one of them. Is it an and or an or? to be careful.
Yeah, I think,
I think it come out, you get all the way down to the bottom on, there were two different sections that I looked at, and one of them had an or. I'm not sure that the other one even had an or on the last item. So you don't have to solve it tonight, but suggest deciding what we want it to be and then making it pretty clear. Okay?
yep. Yep, I think by and large, the definitions are copied from the CCC regs. And
Well, if
having
that
said
question
that-
is open, I still want us to see what we can do about covering it.
yeah, the medical marijuana treatment center definition, it's a complicated sentence, but I think the or is in the correct place for that. But yeah, that's something to be sure of before we commit this.
Well, you might even make it clearer.
Which is
Our
sometimes
opinion.
easier said than done, but yes.
No. Something at the beginning about one or more of these. But anyway, okay. Good enough.
So we've got,
How about bills? Minutes.
Yeah, we can move on.
nothing
you have
else
direction from
on
us?
zoning
Nope.
articles?
That's
Good.
good.
All right.
Oh, not for fall, but if we're talking about zoning activity, what was it? I was just thinking. Oh, no, Holden Farm. I've heard maybe Chris, somebody around, has used the term. Maybe it was somebody up at CMRPC. Has mentioned one or two terms being used to more or less describe, at least in general, the activities that are currently of interest at Holden. If I wonder if we could define terminology that would adequately describe that kind of activity and allow it in all zones, or at least whatever zones we decide to, on properties that qualify for the agricultural exemption. In other words, don't say you can do this anywhere in all the residential zones. Say this is a use that's allowable in something like qualifying properties of more than 20 acres, or whatever we would decide. That won't solve the problem for this year, but it might put us in a good position, or have an opportunity to think about it for the spring. Because I, except for some complaints about the music, I haven't seen any other complaints about the activity, except maybe from a competitor. There's rumors that a competitor is unhappy about it. The town has to have an appropriate license available, and I guess the idea is they can grant the license and I don't know why the zoning says they can or can't grant the license. You can grant the license and still not have the use, because the zoning says whether you have a license or not, you still can't do the use. I did find where that, there's a place where we say other food and alcohol, and it's not allowed in the residential zones. But what do you think, Chris?
Is the term that was being used, is that the agritourism use?
I don't know. It might be. I don't know what that exactly means, though. I know that at CMRPC, they have the, they have the rural something. it's all towns kind of on the west side of Worcester, and they're interested in all sorts of things like keeping farms and helping them and whatnot. Probably that filtered by in some of that discussion. But some idea, I haven't seen a definition of what that term is, but a term like that might be good. That the state is really interested in helping farms. I think about 90% of the people in Grafton are in favor of helping farms. Try to find something that's compatible. Defines it compatible.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can look into. I think certainly when looking at those uses, having a proper permitting mechanism to follow gives the town the ability to kind of regulate, to ask the questions about the business and to set kind of some boundaries as well. Obviously to protect the public and the interests of the public. So I think that would be probably very useful to look into, and I'm happy to take a look at it for, I don't think we'll have it certainly won't have it for this fall, but we can look at it in the future town meetings.
Yeah, the thing was that, I've been trying to figure out how do you put permission into residential zones. And then the thought came, we have the agricultural exemption, and that's a starting point, proper real agricultural exemption, and it's only as good as long as they meet that, which means they have to be selling a certain amount of so on and so on and so on. It's not just somebody who says I'm a farm.
Right. Yeah. It's got to be the 5 acres, and you're right. There's a specific and very detailed set of criteria, which I top of mind can't reiterate it. So I think it's about a paragraph of things that they have to comply with. So. But yeah, in terms of, I think these types of uses, the family farms, especially with, attracting kind of, that engagement with agriculture, connecting people back with the food and that process of harvesting is certainly important, and that we can look into how that, I think the Holden Farms has a number of kind of things going on that are perhaps more complicated certainly than the agricultural exemption, but we can look at how that could be somewhat accommodated or a similar situation.
Okay.
Yep.
Bills?
All right. We have no bills, it looks like, and no minutes of previous meeting. So our next item is staff report.
I think we've covered it today. Yeah. So.
All right. Anyone see anything of note in correspondence?
Nothing caught my eye.
Any reports from planning board representatives on town committees?
I'm interested in tomorrow night's select board. It looks like they're proposing to make a request to the CPC
Yes.
for money.
Yeah, for
And I hope that the planning board's point of view is supported.
Oh.
I have no idea what they're gonna be asking for if they actually do.
On that, I can report to the board. It sort of slipped my mind, but yeah, that's not doesn't exactly fit within this agenda category, but it's close. As you probably all recall, back in May, toward the end of May, we were asked to provide a recommendation on the town exercising its right of first refusal on 2 parcels on 173 and 183 Upton Street. And we discussed fairly briefly the idea that maybe a portion of those parcels should be considered by the Affordable Housing Trust as a possible location for housing, given that right across the street there is a multifamily development, specifically 16 condos. So, week before last, the Affordable Housing Trust invited me to present this idea to them. You know, sort of in hindsight, I wish we'd gotten together with them earlier, because the clock was ticking on this. But anyway, so I prepared a presentation, explained to the Housing Trust what was going on with these parcels, our board's recommendation that the town exercise its right of first refusal to acquire the parcels, and give the trust an opportunity to consider whether they would be interested in acquiring a portion of those parcels. By presumably, once the town acquired them, the town could then gift a portion to the trust. So I think our position was clear that we saw the value in acquiring those parcels. We saw the value in giving some consideration to using some of the front portion of those parcels for possible housing. Some discussion with the trust sort of coming at this idea, without, almost at the last minute, because the deadline for our decision to exercise the right is September 7th. Anyway, the trust was sort of interested, but they weren't jumping up and down with enthusiasm. And then the very next Tuesday last week, the select board took this up. I gave to the select board essentially the same presentation I gave to the trust, explained what I could say. I couldn't speak for the trust, but all I could say was the trust didn't seem to have a whole lot of interest, because they've got other things on their plate, which I quite understand. But anyway, the select board voted to exercise the right of first refusal to acquire the property with CPA funds. So that's the request that they now have to formally put that request to CPA. The CPC did vote to recommend that the property be acquired, and did say informally that they have sufficient funds.
Yes.
So this is kind of the formality.
Yeah.
The select board is going to formally request the funds from the CPC. The select board intends to schedule a special town meeting for the end of August to vote to appropriate the funds. So all that happens prior to the September 7th deadline, and then the town can proceed to acquire those two parcels.
Yeah. And the CPC at their last meeting did informally express a strong interest in pushing this to town meeting.
Yes.
So
yes, I think everybody involved in making the recommendation was very strongly supportive of it, for a lot of reasons, and we probably mentioned this at our meeting when we discussed it, that these are two of the last four parcels the town needs to acquire to complete the acquisition and protection of all the land around Silver Lake. I understand, I was told last week that the other two parcels are now being offered for sale. So at some point, the owner is likely to get an offer, at which point that will come back to the town for another round of this.
Yep.
And those two parcels, well, I don't know, but I would say, to me, it looks like those two parcels really aren't very suitable for consideration for housing. But as a general rule, sort of going forward, I think it's a good idea for any time Chapter 61 withdrawal comes to the town, the Affordable Housing Trust should be given a chance to consider whether they could use part of it.
There's a list of bodies that the selectmen are supposed to forward those solicitation or those
Yes.
Announcements to for recommendations, like we get.
Yeah.
Is affordable housing on that list? And if not, then isn't the thing to do to put them on the list?
affordable housing is not on that list. The select board did, at least in this particular case, make an express request to have
Sure.
the affordable housing trust input.
Yeah, I think I got the sense from the board, the select board, that going forward, they think it's a good idea to always ask the trust for input on this.
Good. Well, that sounds good. When you look at the map, where Dave and Linda, are pretty familiar with this area, the Great Meadow and Misco Brook and all of it, Silver Lake. And this really does help fill out the the whole area, and it makes a really good open space, protected area. We ought to be getting lots of carbon dioxide sequestered. But really, that's good. And I think at one point, Dave, you said something about the town. Some of the discussion had been the town could gift land to the trust. What we're talking about here doesn't preclude that in the future if the town decides, right? If the town owns the land, then it can
Right.
put it on Worcester Street.
One small point in my discussion with the Affordable Housing Trust was the question of whether, a chapter land withdrawal, whether the trust could purchase that more directly. And I think the conclusion was no, because the town can exercise the right of first refusal. And when the town purchases a piece of chapter land, the town basically can do anything it decides it wants to do with it. The town can also, I forget what the term is exactly, but the town can give the right to acquire it to some other organization, to another municipal entity, to the state, or to the land trust. But if the town hands it off to someone else, they're required to use at least 70% of it for open space. So there are constraints on it.
Oh.
And the Affordable Housing Trust is not one of the entities to whom the town can assign the right. Assign the right is what the term I was looking for. So if the Affordable Housing Trust did have an interest, the town would have to acquire the property and then gift or otherwise transfer the land to the trust.
Yeah. So that divides those two questions at town meeting. We can get the land, and then if it comes to affordable housing, okay.
Yeah.
Another article.
And then there's another wrinkle on that, and that is if we use CPA funds to purchase the land, any portion of the land that ends up for housing has to be the 100% of the housing on that land acquired with CPA funds has to be affordable for 100% of AMI or less, which is a little bit more generous than the typical 80% of AMI limit for inclusion in the subsidized housing inventory. But nevertheless, it's a constraint that would make development of housing considerably, probably financially infeasible. So if we were to acquire a 61A parcel and want to use some of it for housing, we would have to make sure that we use non-CPA funds for the portion that is to end up going for housing. That's for future consideration, if ever, but that's one of the things that came up in that discussion.
That hurts. Maybe the town could sell it to the town and break that.
One could conceivably have the town sell a parcel of land to the trust.
Yeah, for $1. Well, or whatever. Never mind.
I mean, this is wildly off topic here, but interesting nevertheless.
Haven't we beaten this this agenda to death?
Oh, I think it's beyond dead. It's decomposing now.
Yes. Right. So I move we adjourn.
Second.
That's non-debatable. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thank you for coming to this meeting. Have a good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.